trying to piece together the life story of someone from, what, over 5,000 years ago, it really feels like assembling a jigsaw puzzle where most of the pieces are just gone.
Well, maybe they belong to a different puzzle entirely.
Exactly. And that's kind of the challenge we're looking at today with this very early Egyptian ruler Ka. He's from long before the famous pyramids, a real archaeological mystery.
It is compelling, though, isn't it? Because despite that huge stretch of time, we aren't completely in the dark about Ka. We have clues.
Clues, right? What kind of clues?
Well, mostly inscriptions on ancient pottery,
Yeah.
vessels, and also his actual burial site down in Abydos. Think of it like ancient detective work, really. These little fragments are our main leads.
Ancient sleuthing, I like that. So our mission today is to look at these clues, try to figure out who Ka really was roughly when he ruled in Upper Egypt, and, what his existence tells us about that incredibly early, crucial period in Egyptian history.
Sounds good.
And okay, let's start with something really basic. His name. Seems simple enough. Ka, but I gather there's a bit more to it.
There absolutely is. Even how we read his name is, well, it's the first puzzle. We see this symbol, right? The hieroglyph we usually read as Ka. It looks like a pair of raised arms.
Okay, the arm symbol. Got it.
That appears on lots of artifacts, but sometimes inside his royal sarek, that's the rectangular frame thing representing the palace.
Ah, the palace facade symbol.
Exactly. Sometimes the arm symbol inside that is shown upside down, inverted.
Upside down.
And that's led some scholars to suggest maybe his name wasn't Ka, but Seekin.
Seekin. What does that mean?
It means something like to embrace someone, based on that inverted symbol.
Wow, so just flipping the symbol changes the whole meaning of pronunciation. That's quite something, like a hidden message.
It is. And then, others have suggested maybe a more neutral reading, just acknowledging the symbol like king arms because of this uncertainty.
Bing arms. Oh. Okay, that covers the basis, I suppose.
And there's even a suggestion, maybe less certain, that his personal name might have been something like King App.
Huh. It just really shows how much interpretation is involved with these super early writings, doesn't it?
It really does. You're looking at the very beginnings of writing systems here. This ambiguity, it just highlights how difficult it can be to definitively translate these earliest forms of royal names.
Okay, so the name itself is a bit of a question mark.
Yeah.
But we have a better idea of when and where he was ruling.
Okay,
right?
yes, much better. The evidence points pretty clearly to the first half of the 32nd century BC.
32nd century BC. That's incredibly early. Really the dawn of what we think of as Egyptian civilization.
Absolutely. And geographically, his power base seems to have been Thinis in Upper Egypt.
Thinis. And that was an important place.
Oh, hugely important. Thinis was a key city in Upper Egypt, and it plays a big role later in the story of unification. So placing Ka there at that time puts him right in the middle of that whole transformative process.
And his burial reinforces that Upper Egyptian connection.
Definitely. His tomb is in the el-Kab necropolis at Abydos. And for anyone listening who might not know, el-Kab is the place where the earliest pharaohs were buried. It's a crucial site for understanding royal lineages and burial traditions right at the start.
Right, the royal cemetery. So speaking of lineages, what about his place in the sequence of rulers? Can we sort of slot him in somewhere?
We think so, yes. The location of his tomb within al-Kab gives us some really good clues.
How so?
Well, his burial chambers that are labeled B7 and B9 are located very close to the tomb complex of Iri-Hor.
Iri-Hor.
Yeah.
He's generally thought to be Comey's predecessor.
That's the consensus, yes. And then a bit further along in the cemetery's layout, you find the tombs linked to Narmer and possibly Scorpion II, who came after Ka.
Ah, so the physical layout of the cemetery kind of reflects the timeline.
It strongly suggests it. It implies Ka ruled after Iri-Hor, but before Narmer, or maybe Scorpion II. It's almost like reading history laid out on the ground.
That makes sense.
Right.
How confident are archaeologists about that sequence? Are there other ways to read the evidence?
That's a fair question. I'd say the spatial relationship in the necropolis is probably the most compelling evidence we have for his position. There aren't really strong competing theories based on the current findings at Abydos.
Okay, so he's sort of bridging that gap between Iri-Hor and the more famous Narmer. Now, what about his actual rule, his influence? Did it reach far?
This is where it gets really interesting, actually. Ka is, alongside Narmer and maybe Scorpion II, one of the best attested rulers from this whole pre-dynastic period. We have quite a bit of evidence for him.
More than just the tomb, then.
Oh, yes. Numerous artifacts bearing his sarek, that royal palace symbol we mentioned, have been found.
His royal stamp. basically.
Exactly. And crucially, they haven't just been found in Abydos. They turn up across a surprisingly wide area.
Oh, where else?
Well, still in Upper Egypt, there's Edima, but more significantly, finds have been made way up in the north, places like Tarkhan, Helwan, Tel Ibrahim Awad, even Tel El Farka in the eastern Nile Delta.
Wow, the Delta too.
hmm And perhaps most strikingly, even further afield. We found his sarek on pottery fragments discovered at Tel Lod, which is over in the southern Levant, modern-day Israel.
All the way over there. That's quite a reach for such an early ruler, isn't it?
It really is. The sheer distance these artifacts traveled suggests something significant was happening. His authority, or at least his influence, whether through direct control, trade, diplomacy, it was spreading far beyond fineness.
It hints at, perhaps, the beginnings of a larger economic sphere, maybe even political.
Precisely. And you mentioned comparing him to his predecessor, Hor.
Yes, you said Kai was much better attested outside Abydos.
Significantly so. The number of artifacts bearing Ka's name found outside his home base is much, much greater than for Hor.
So what does that jump suggest?
Well, it strongly points towards an increase in the reach, the influence, maybe even the power of these Thinite kings during Ka's time. It could mean expanding trade networks for sure, but maybe also growing diplomatic ties or potentially even, military expansion, controlling more territory.
A move towards greater consolidation, maybe.
That's certainly what it looks like. These scattered bits of pottery are hinting at a kingdom really starting to expand its horizons.
Fascinating. Okay, let's zero in on his tomb again. You said Flinders Petrie excavated it back in 1902. What did he actually find inside those chambers, B7 and B9?
Right, Petrie found these two underground chambers. They're pretty similar in size, roughly 6 meters by 3 meters, something like that, and nearly 2 meters deep, not very far apart from each other.
And the contents, anything spectacular?
The finds themselves were relatively modest, honestly. Fragments of flint knives, bits of pottery, standard tomb goods for the period perhaps, but nothing like, say, Tutankhamun's treasures.
Of course, much, much earlier. But you mentioned one chamber, B7, was particularly important, the southernmost one.
Exactly. Chamber B7 yielded the most crucial evidence. Petrie and later excavators found over 40 inscriptions inside that one chamber.
40? Wow. On what?
Mostly on tall storage jars and these cylinder-shaped vessels. And there was also a seal impression found in B7. These inscriptions are really the main reason we know as much as we do about Ka.
And wasn't there one inscription that felt a bit more personal, something about his family?
Yes, that's right. A really remarkable find. It was a cylinder jar fragment, and it was inscribed not just with Ka's Sarek, but also with the name and title, Ha, wife of the Horus Ka.
His wife's name. Ha! That gives us a tiny glimpse into his personal life, doesn't it? Makes him feel a bit more real.
It absolutely does. It's a rare human connection across 5 millennia.
Amazing. Now, you also mentioned a seal impression found in B7. What was significant about that?
Ah, yes. The seal impression is interesting because it shows Ka's Sarek, the palace symbol, quite clearly. But what's missing is the Horus falcon perched on top.
Falcon's not there. Isn't that usually part of the royal name, linking the king to the god Horus?
Exactly. Later on, the Horus falcon becomes absolutely standard, a really prominent part of the royal titulary, symbolizing that divine connection. Its absence on this early seal from Ka's tomb is fascinating.
Why? What does it suggest?
Well, it suggests that this incredibly powerful symbol of divine kingship, the king as Horus on Earth, might still have been developing. It wasn't yet fully standardized in Ka's time. We're seeing the evolution of royal ideology happening right there on that little piece of clay.
So the symbols themselves are telling a story about how the idea of kingship was changing and solidifying. That's really insightful.
It is. These small details can open up big questions.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together.
Hmm.
We've journeyed pretty far back, over 5,000 years, to explore this early Egyptian ruler, Ka. We've seen the uncertainty around his actual name, Ka, second king arms.
Mhm.
We've pinned down his likely time, that first half of the 32nd century BC, placing him in Thinis, Upper Egypt. And we've seen his position in the lineage, likely after Hor and before the famous Narmer.
And crucially, we've looked at the evidence, those scattered artifacts bearing his Sarek, which really seems to show a growing sphere of influence coming out of Thinis during his reign. It hints strongly at the early phases of Egypt becoming more unified.
Right. So here's something maybe for you, the listener, to think about. What does that increasing geographical spread of Kai's royal symbol actually tell us about what was happening in pre-dynastic Egypt? Was it all about peaceful trade and exchange? Was it more about strategic alliances being formed? Or are we seeing the very first steps towards unification through actual conquest and control?
It's a great question, and it really makes you appreciate how these tiny archaeological fragments, bits of pottery, seal impressions, tomb layouts, how they allow us to piece together, however imperfectly, these huge historical narratives.